Lots of fun stuff coming today on Locked On Pacers. First and foremost, a short one-on-one interview with Pacers wing / Mad Ants wing Trevelin Queen on a two-way contract. Got to chat with him for about 4.5 minutes last week. Then contract guarantee date coming right up. Big stuff for James Johnson and Oshae Brissett as 10 days can start being signed by teams. The trade deadline's approaching. So lots of roster tweaks coming for the Pacers. We'll get to it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI. And today, I'm coming to you from the past. I am recording this in late 2022. If you're looking for Raptors postgame coverage, that will be coming tomorrow. And I am pre-recording this because I am at a family member's 100th birthday party. Crazy stuff. And so we'll talk Raptors tomorrow. We'll keep rolling with this team as the punches come. But instead, two awesome things we can get to today. First and foremost, Trevelin Queen, Pacers player, two-way contract, a wing who played in 2 games with them on their recent road trip. I guess not so recent road trip. Chatted with him for about 4.5 minutes, one-on-one, recently after he played for the Mad Ants. Going to air that whole interview. It was really awesome to talk with him. And then big contract stuff coming up for the Pacers. James Johnson and Oshae Brissett's contracts become guaranteed if they are not waived by or on Saturday, right? Very soon decision the Pacers have to make. I'll talk about the pros and cons of keeping those guys, what it all means, especially with 10-day contracts soon to be permitted to be signed. Lots of roster change hurdles coming up for the Pacers. We'll start, though, with Trevelin Queen, who, if you'll remember, they flew him in on their road trip with the Pacers. They were playing Blazers. Tyrese Haliburton's hurt that night. TJ McConnell comes down with a sickness. We're out of players. They fly him in. He plays 13 minutes against Portland. He's a +6. He played 7 minutes in the win over Golden State, the stunning Andrew Nembhard game. Those are only 2 appearances for the Pacers this season, but has been crushing it for the Mad Ants this year. Has drawn high praise from a lot of people I've talked to within the Pacers org, whether that's coaches, other players, whatever. People really think he's good. If you remember, Trevelin Queen, G League MVP last year. He had 24 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists at the game I was at. Very passionate player. We talk about that in this interview. We chatted for about 4.5 minutes. It was the first time, the G League just had the G League showcase. So the Mad Ants were out in Vegas, and Queen, I did all that traveling with the Pacers too. So he was really psyched to see his daughter and be home for a little bit around the holidays. So we didn't chat for that long, but it's still a really fun conversation. We talked about Tyrese Haliburton, Queen's time with the Pacers, where his passion comes from, his goals for his career, all sorts of awesome stuff from Trevelin Queen, who is, in his second year in the NBA with the Pacers. Air the whole interview here, and then we will pivot and start talking James Johnson, Oshae Brissett, guaranteed contracts, and the Pacers' next steps in the team-building process this season.
First and foremost, big game for you. What do you feel like went into that? I saw you were quite passionate a lot of times throughout this one.
I think I just woke up on the right side of the bed this morning. The last game, I got fresh off a flight, so my legs weren't really there today, but the guys picked me up, so today was a much better day for us overall.
That passion from you after dunks, after and ones, even defensively in that first quarter, is that something that you've always had as a part of your game, the way you play? Is that a today thing? What kind of goes into that?
Nah, if you watch my film, you know me, you know that I play with passion and emotion the whole game. No matter if it's a steal, a foul, or and one, anything like that, I play with passion and I always show it. So it helps not only me stay engaged in the game, helps my teammates, bring them energy, bring the coaching staff energy to the team. So I feel like I'm that guy that plays with so much passion and energy.
How do you feel like you've grown so far with this Mad Ants team, as a leader, as a player, everything?
I just come in and do my job. They count on me to bring the energy. As I go, they go, as what they told me yesterday. So I feel like I got to come in and be a great leader each and every day, whether it's on the court, off the court, help the young guys, and just lead by example, lead by effort, lead by energy. Like I said, passion. So everybody else starts playing with passion and gets emotional. So it's definitely a key for us.
Any skills you're trying to work on at this level this season? Things like that?
Just trying to get my teammates involved more, see the floor more, less turnovers, work on tightening my handles up a little bit, take better shots, less off the dribble, tough shots.
You had a brief stint on the road with the Pacers. What was that like? How were those games? You guys did pretty well in your minutes out there.
Well, it was an amazing feeling just to be out there with the guys, a great group of guys down here and up there. So for me, I just try to keep the same mindset, same approach to the game. up top, you learn a little bit more because the guys are a little more veteran, play at the highest level possible. So for me, I just try to be more of a student when I'm up top.
What was the chaos of all that like? I think you traveled to Portland day of the game, right? How was all that? How did that sort out for you, basically?
That's the life of a two-way. You got to stay ready whenever. You never know when your name's going to be called. You can play 3 games in a row and then travel to the West Coast and play 4 games in a row and not be home for 2 months. So it's just the life of a two-way.
How did Rick help you or talk to you in those moments? You know, Kendall's talked about him being helpful for his development. Rick's talked about the season. He's loved being more of a teacher of skills, things like that. How's he helped you both in those games and all year?
He just keeps me level-headed, keeps me grounded, lets me know that every day you got to come in and be a professional, not just an athlete, but a person in the workplace. He's just a great coach. He doesn't take no bullshit from anybody. He doesn't sugarcoat nothing. He keeps it straight up. And for me, that's the type of coach I need that's going to get on me and coach me hard. So I'm truly appreciative for that.
You're with this team a lot at the end of camp, and Pacers are exceeding most everybody's expectations this year at 18 and 17. What do you feel like has fueled the way that team and your team has been able to play this year?
We all like each other on and off the court. We all have the same reasons why we do what we do. We're trying to win a championship, trying to take care of ourselves and our family. We show love to one another. There's no envy. There's no hate. We're all happy for each other, no matter what it is, whatever we do. It's just a great camaraderie. It's a great team.
Tyrese Halliburton's on maybe the best run of his career ever. What have you seen being around him, playing with him, that makes him so good, has made him step up so much this year?
He's just a great leader. He just leads by example. Like I said before, he's very approachable. Whether it's the midst of the game, whether it's the beginning of the game, whether it's we're down 10, he's always calm, cool, collective. He's a great passer. He's a great leader, like I said before. He just brings so much to the game that I guess everybody doubted him. I don't know why. He's a great player. He's phenomenal IQ. It's just crazy how he does everything he does. Well, we got his back. He's an all-star in my eyes, so I don't know how he doesn't get all-star. That's a robbery.
I feel like he's got a good chance. He was telling me that he uses tweets with 2 followers, people, as motivation for him. For you this year, what's been a big motivator for you to keep going? You know, switching teams right before camp and keep going and try to grow with this organization.
I just want to win a championship. That's all I care about. I don't do this for the money, social status, the fame. I just want to win championships and be remembered for doing what I love.
Hope you enjoyed that chat. That's now both two-way players, Kendall Brown and Trevelin Queen, that we've had on here from those settings with the Mad Ants. Really appreciate getting to do those things and get you guys to know those players a little bit better. Now, time for the big enchilada for today's show in terms of roster construction. People want to know all about this stuff. Contract guarantees. James Johnson on a non-guaranteed deal. Oshae Brissett currently on a non-guaranteed deal. The deadlines for those are this Saturday. We'll talk about what the decisions are, what it means, what the kind of options the Pacers have, their team building status at this point in the season, all sorts of that kind of considerations that they have to have for this decision, and how the ability to sign 10-day contracts very soon could play in, could not play in, depending on what direction they ultimately choose. Before we do that, though, hey guys, let's take one short little break here so I can talk to you about PrizePicks. The premise is simple. Do you think Luka Doncic will score more than 26.5 points, for example, or Kevin Durant to have more or less than 6.5 assists, LeBron to have more or less than 7.5 rebounds? That's PrizePicks. You pick 2 to 6 players, and will they do more or less than their PrizePicks projection on a given stat? And you can up to 25 times your money on any entry. You don't compete against other people. It's just you versus the projections available on PrizePicks. That's why I love it. That makes it so simple and so fun. And they have projections on any sport you watch: NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, college, NASCAR, tennis, everything. You've got it. Entries can be made in a minute or less. So it's easy, it's fun, it's safe with fast withdrawals, and operational in over 30 states plus Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com. Sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. When you start up, if you deposit 100, PrizePicks will give you 100. You deposit 50, they'll give you 50. You get the idea, but that's only if you use the promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for that instant deposit match. PrizePicks, daily fantasy made easy. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Raptors. Sean Woodley will be breaking down that game that the Raptors and Pacers played that I will be getting to tomorrow once I actually have a chance to sit down and fully watch it. But instead, we are talking about contract guarantees. So here is the situation staring at the Pacers right this second, right? The way that NBA contracts work is you are allowed to have non-guaranteed contracts that have several guarantee dates. For example, Dwayne Washington's contract for the Pacers this season would become fully guaranteed if he was on the roster on July 15th. He was waived right before that, so the Pacers could send their offer sheet to DeAndre Ayton. Terry Taylor's became fully guaranteed about a week before that, for example. You could go on and on. And so there does become a point in the season where every contract that's non-guaranteed becomes fully guaranteed for the rest of the season. That date is January 10th every single season. So most players, I would not say most, I would say some players have a predetermined date when their deal becomes guaranteed, and others just have a fully non-guaranteed deal that becomes guaranteed at some point in time. And that date is January 10th, but it's not actually January 10th. If you're on a roster January 10th, your deal becomes fully guaranteed. But if you don't clear waivers, you're technically on a roster. So a player has to fully clear waivers to not be considered on a roster on the guarantee date. And so because waivers take 2 days, they take 48 hours, a player actually has to be waived by January 7th to be off of a team's books if they need salary flexibility or if they want to change directions or things like that. So that's the whole backstory on the deadline coming up this week. The Pacers are not the only team impacted by this. Every single team with non-guaranteed contracts will have to deal with this sort of thing coming up. And look, there's tons and tons of players who have non-guaranteed deals, but like the Raptors just waived Justin Champagny. I said his name wrong. It looks like Champagne, but it's Champagny. Because his contract was fully guaranteed on New Year's Day, right? Like teams are conscious of these dates, what it means for their team building needs, things like that. Like Isaiah Joe got cut by the Sixers. He's been balling for the Thunder. Like you could go on and on with how these go. Obviously, again, Dwayne Washington got waived. And if you go back a year for the Pacers, Keelan Martin got waived right in front of that contract guarantee date. Remember, back then, the Pacers had to deal with quite a lot. How do they keep Lance Stevenson when all these hardship contracts in 10 days no longer become available? They also were staring down tax concerns last year that they could have traded their way out of, but it was easier with the flexibility provided by waiving Keelan Martin, who, by the way, is playing very well for the Pelicans G League team this season. So Kiefer Sykes, though, he had a non-guaranteed deal. He did make the Pacers roster for the rest of the season, but we'll talk about him in a second. He's important. And Oshae Brissett's deal was non-guaranteed last year. He was never going to get cut. His contract got picked up. So the Pacers face this every year. Damian Wilkins got cut a few years ago, right? You could go on and on with the number of guys this affects. So what this doesn't mean is if a player's on the team after January 10th, they cannot get cut the rest of the season. That is not true, right? A player can, theoretically, any player can be waived at any time, even if their contract is fully guaranteed. The difference is it doesn't come off. You don't create more salary cap space or tax space or whatever. You don't add more room. You don't add more spending power. Their contract stays on your books and it's guaranteed, right? So, for example, going back to 2021 season, Jalen LeCue was on a fully guaranteed deal. He got waived mid-March. Pacers just cut him. They wanted the roster spot instead. They still had to pay LeCue's salary for the remainder of that season, but they used that roster spot to bring in Oshae Brissett, right? They will take that for how it worked out every day of the week, especially because all they had to do is eat a couple $100,000, right? Last year, with the 4 days to go in the season, they waived Kiefer Sykes. That allowed them to sign Terry Taylor to a team-friendly deal. Again, that worked out very well for them in the long run, right? So there are reasons to waive guaranteed contract players, but again, they're non-guaranteed until the 10th, and that's usually when you see a rush of waivers as teams try to maintain flexibility or make other moves. So that's setting most of the scene. The other factor at play, sorry for so much backstory here, is that on January 5th, which is coming right up 2 days from now, for every team in the league, 10-day contracts can start being signed. Now, in theory, the Pacers sort of, you can kind of get around this. Like if you sign a player to a non-guaranteed contract on December 27th, you could waive them before the cutdown date, and then you effectively sign them to a 10-day contract. But either way, official 10-day deals, as they're named, can start being signed on the 5th, and that is why teams might cut players a little before that January 7th, date, because they could then sign a player immediately to a two-way, try somebody out. There's a rush of two-way exchanges by teams right around Christmas, right? Teams get ready for these deadlines in advance for a reason. And so back to the Pacers, who have a full roster right now. When Thursday comes and it's January 5th and 10 days are available, they do not have room to add anyone on a 10-day unless something happens between me talking right now on December 30th and the 3rd of January. But assuming they don't, then the Pacers won't be able to add anybody on a 10-day. But that is a factor at play. So how does this matter for James Johnson and Oshae Brissett? Well, neither of them have guaranteed contracts at the moment, right? So if either of them are cut before or on Saturday, their contract comes off the Pacers' books. The Pacers get slightly more cap space to use on an imbalanced trade. signing someone if they somehow find a player worth $26 million at this stage of the season. That will not happen. But, for example, or if they just want a roster spot, but the roster spot they could create regardless of the financial incentives. So the reason the deadline matters is just because their deals are not actually guaranteed at this time. So that is setting the scene for the decision facing the Pacers on James Johnson and Oshae Brissett. Now, the reason I brought up a couple players here, Keelan Martin last year, for example, Damian Wilkins a few years ago, right? The Pacers have cut guys in this time in the past, right? They've been conscious of this deadline. They've used it to create flexibility. But in those instances, though, especially so with Martin, there were a lot more financial motivations involved. Getting a roster spot is super helpful, like waiving Damian Wilkins in 2017-18. The Pacers used that roster spot to bring in Trevor Booker, right? Like that worked out. Trevor Booker was in their playoff rotation, and that's all great. But there's a difference this year in that the Pacers currently have $24 million in salary cap space. They're below the salary floor. They don't need to be saving money. So why, yes, they can. This is the best time and the cheapest time and the last chance. Deadlines are always deadlines always cause action in the NBA. And so if the Pacers do truly want a roster spot for various reasons, yeah, they might cut these guys because they can save some money by doing so. But the financial incentive isn't as strong for the Pacers to decide with James Johnson or Oshae Brissett, do they want to keep them or not? We'll talk about Oshae a little bit in the third segment here, but with James Johnson specifically, right? He barely plays for the Pacers this season. I think he's played in less than 10 games at this stage of time, and most of those appearances are against the Nets, his former team, which he plays because he knows their tendencies. Yeah, he has 9 games, as of me recording. He could have 10 by the time this airs. He played 71 minutes right through December 30th. Right, not a big minutes eater for the Pacers, but his value is more off court. He's been a great veteran for this team, right? I talked to TJ McConnell. He told me that James Johnson doesn't let things slide. And, sometimes guys let things go. James Johnson absolutely doesn't. And, Johnson has been, he even opened up to us about, how much he knows that this team really likes each other. And he's been on a lot of teams, right? Goga said he's amazing. He really helped the team get together, right? I could go on and on. James Johnson's been really valuable to this team. So the reason I bring all that up is in a normal year where the Pacers might be over the cap or looking for resources to improve their team, I think the financial benefits of waiving Johnson would be appealing to them, right? They could open up some cap space or some tax space to all of a sudden have more flexibility to do something with that spot or have more money to sign another player. But this year, that's not that valuable because they already have $24 million, more than that really, of salary cap space that they can use in salary dumps or use in trades. And the other thing to note is if they want to sign somebody with a roster spot, if James Johnson's contract is guaranteed, they could just cut him anyway because they need to reach the salary floor somehow, some way, right? So if they keep him, they could just do what they did with Jalen McHugh, like I said, or Kiefer Sykes. They could just keep him, his contract guarantees, no big deal. But then say they get to the trade deadline and the best 2-for-1 trade ever comes and the Pacers need to clear a roster spot to make it happen. They could waive Johnson then, and then it doesn't hurt the team in any way. And they're allowed to re-sign him if they waive him, and then he doesn't sign with anybody in waiver. So there's all these factors at play usually that make this a complicated decision, whether it's a team's finances or their ability to use another roster spot or a need that they might have or flexibility being needed. The Pacers have a lot of flexibility. They do not have any financial strain right now in terms of building their roster. So the big thing is, do the Pacers value, the decision comes down to, do the Pacers value a roster spot more than they value James Johnson? And I would say, given what he provides off the court, no, I don't think that they would at this time. And so, I am guessing. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know what flexibility they would like at the deadline. But if it just kind of makes sense that they would keep him through it. And then if they ever need the roster spot, they could just cut him. But if they would like to save the money when they can, then maybe they will move him. All this wishy-washy. I don't know what they're going to do, but I think there's good merit to both sides. Whereas in usual seasons like last year, there's a lot of complication of how do they, what do they do to open the spot that will obviously eventually become Lance, right? Do they cut Keelan? Do they cut Oshae? Do they cut Kiefer Sykes? Like, what is the move going to be so they can eventually bring in Lance? And 2 years ago, there was financial concerns with the luxury tax. There was last year a little bit too. This year, there's like very little of that going on, to the point that they could just keep James Johnson through the deadline, and that would make good sense. But if they cut him, they get an extra roster spot that they could use for trades or to sign a player to a 10-day. There are a million options that pop up with it. And so if they value the roster spot more, perhaps they go that route. But they don't need anything in the rotation. It's not like there's anyone sitting out there really obvious that they would want. They could sign somebody right now if they really loved someone that was out there. So all of this background information to say, James Johnson could go either way to me. I think there's good reason to do both. Whereas in most years leading up to this, it's more clear what the Pacers are going to do with their non-guaranteed guys. And James Johnson is not the only non-guaranteed guy. Oshae Brissett is as well. Are there any different considerations with him? What other deadlines are coming up? Does this all have any bearing on the trade market? Let's close out talking about that. One more break here, guys, so I can talk to you about BetOnline.net, your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You need it. They got to get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball. They just finished up the World Cup. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. They are always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. For example, it's now set. TCU, Georgia, the championship game. Georgia Bulldogs favored by 13.5. For example, you can get those lines and more all over at betonline.net. Again, the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head over to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action over at betonline.net, because BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, hop on over to Locked On Sports Today for the latest and greatest news around the entire sporting world. Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with the local experts here at the Locked On Podcast Network, available on Odyssey, YouTube, wherever you get podcasts. So the second straight season where Oshae Brissett's contract is non-guaranteed. He's in the same situation as James Johnson from a contract perspective, where his contract is not guaranteed. It becomes fully guaranteed if he's still on the team come Saturday. The difference is James Johnson has played 71 minutes for the Pacers this season. Oshae Brissett is an everyday rotation player. There is no chance, unless between now and the 7th, and by now I mean you're recording, Oshae Brissett gets dramatically injured. There's no way. It just doesn't make sense for the Pacers to move on from him. They do not need the financial flexibility. There's nothing more they could do with him off the team. Like, it's not like there's a different minimum contract they could use better or anything like that. So look, the decision with Oshae is easy. He's a minimum salary player who's in their rotation. He will stay through the deadline unless something crazy happens with like a trade option right before or something like that. You get the picture, though. You know, with James Johnson, the difference is there a better use of the roster spot? With Brissett, that question goes away because there's not, right? He's a 23-year-old forward who's young, cheap, and in their rotation. His contract seems much more likely to stay. James Johnson is the more interesting factor in this discussion because of the contract guarantee. Everybody else on the Pacers, their deal is already fully guaranteed for the remainder of the season. Terry Taylor's was last July. Everybody else's was on signing or, just being on the team this season. So those are the two players to keep an eye on this week, James Johnson and Oshae Brissett. But Brissett seems exceedingly likely, greater than 99.5% chance to remain, while James Johnson, there are considerations on both sides for the Pacers, but I think the flexibility, they have roughly equivalent flexibility either way, and the fact that they're below the salary floor has to matter in this discussion. So that the other factors have exist now is there's a lot of other roster stuff that is now kind of on the table for teams. And the big one is, in 2 days, I already mentioned this, 10-day contracts can be signed. Pacers use 10 days all the time. Last year, obviously, was exceptional because, the COVID hardship contracts made it feel like teams were signing 10 days left and right. Guys were playing from everywhere. Kiefer Sykes got a fake 10-day with the non-guarantee. Justin Anderson got a bunch of real 10 days. Lance Stevenson got a bunch of real 10 days. Last year, they were really prevalent. In a normal season, the Pacers typically sign one guy to one or two, right? Oshae Brissett got two before he signed a deal long-term. Stephon Hicks, I think, was the year before that. I'm worried I'm going to miss someone in this. But either way, they've been good about using their 10-day. Trey McKinney-Jones got a 10-day. They use their 10 days to bring in sometimes a Mad Ants player, sometimes a reinforcement when injuries are going and bothering them. That is what something the Pacers have been good at, is using the 10 days constructively. Now, they usually do it in March or late after the trade deadline when their team situation is settled and they know what the right use of that spot is. If they waive one of Johnson or Brissett, all of a sudden, they would think about, to me, sooner they would think about 10 days, right? If you have an opening on January 10th because you waived somebody, and then you sign a player to 10 days, you have now evaluated that player. You have the same amount of flexibility at the trade deadline on the 9th, and then you can circle back. There's a lot of moving parts here with that deadline. So at some point, if the Pacers do open up a roster spot, whether that's with a trade or a waiver or something, expect them to pursue 10 days at least. They've been very good about using them, and they've brought in some helpful talent for their team long-term using them in the past. But that's another deadline that is, right around the corner that matters for the sake of this discussion. Is the extra roster tool to add a player is relevant to adding a roster spot to also add a player. So keep that in mind in these discussions as well. Is there's more roster flexibility tools at the fingertips of the Pacers. Trade deadline also is 1 month after this deadline. And look, I already brought this up. This deadline, the contract guarantee deadline, as it relates to the trade deadline, usually is a factor because teams need to clear money, like I've talked about with the Pacers. But the Pacers don't need to clear money, and they can clear the roster spot anytime. Again, if they, for example, find the best trade ever where they love the assets they're getting, but it requires them sending a player to the Knicks, and they get 2 Knicks players back, but they can't do it unless they clear a roster spot, they'll just cut a guaranteed contract. They could cut James Johnson on February 1st, even with a fully guaranteed deal, and still do that. So it's not like usually this contract guarantee deadline is, more impactful for trades, but for the Pacers, because you can do it anytime anyway, it's not, they're not that much connected for them this year because of the flexibility they have. Now, it won't, the flip side is also true where, usually they're connected. When they're more disconnected, that means the opposite is also the case, where if the Pacers do cut somebody, that does not mean they have something lined up in a trade. Don't be the guy who says, oh, they waived James Johnson, they must have a deal lined up. No, they're pursuing the flexibility. The 2-for-1s are still on the table. They could circle back with anybody at any time. So there's a lot of factors at play with that deadline as well. And the other final thing is January 15th is when guys who re-signed with their past team on a bird rights contract they couldn't sign with somebody else can also be traded. Basically, on January 15th, every player in the league can be dealt. So teams that are in unique cap situations, such as, Philly being barely over the tax. I think Portland is barely over or under the tax. I can't remember where they ended up. For example, there's a bunch of teams, that have a certain relationship with the salary cap line or with the tax line. Keep an eye on what they do, because if they do something interesting or they cut somebody good, right? 1, trades could be coming, and that could open up avenues for the Pacers to explore getting assets. Or 2, they could cut somebody that the Pacers actually want, right? That is not uncommon, that a player waived from their contract guarantee date ends up somewhere else during the same season. So that's always noteworthy. And the last thing to keep an eye on here is the Pacers usually sign him at some point. That's not like a guaranteed thing. I don't think it's necessarily like a must-do on their checklist every season, but it always has worked out that they've wanted a 10-day guy to come up. Last year was Justin Anderson, who ended up making first-team All-G League. He had quite a successful stint for 15 games with the Pacers. There's been a bunch of them through the years. Oshae Brissett, of course, being another. So keep an eye on the Mad Ants players who are playing well. Gabe York, Justin Anderson again. Pedro Bradshaw's been really standing out to me this year. A bunch of the guys that were in with the Pacers for camp, that they could be in the mix for anything if a roster spot opens up for the Pacers. So a lot of information today, but I think this is a good time for it because the deadline's a week away. I want to set the scene, and if you see anything going on with other teams waiving players or the Pacers considering waiving players, that's why deadline spur action. And we are about to hit that deadline that the Pacers have to think about. Hope that all makes sense. If it doesn't, you can tweet at me at TEastNBA. And this podcast is at Locked On Pacers. Back tomorrow talking whatever happened in Pacers Raptors, and of course previewing their game against the Sixers on Wednesday and other Pacers topics coming right up. So thank you guys a ton for listening. Have a great day. We will see you tomorrow.